Friday, August 8th was a busy day at 10050 Cielo Drive. It was the day before Sharon's scheduled baby shower, and the expectant mom was in nesting mode, despite the 90-degree temperatures. Her housekeeper, Winifred Chapman, arrived at 8 a.m. Ms. Chapman had worked for Sharon and Roman since spring of '68, when the Polanskis rented Patty Duke's Beverly Crest house. Winifred lived in the city and took public transportation to and from work, so she often stayed overnight at Cielo for convenience. She and Sharon enjoyed an easy, relaxed relationship, and that day, Sharon asked Winifred if she would prefer to stay over. It was so terribly hot, and Sharon knew that Ms. Chapman didn't have air conditioning at her home. But Winifred declined, to her eternal gratitude. At 8:30 a.m., a handyman arrived to paint the nursery. He stayed several hours, leaving a window open to air out the fumes. The screen was in place. At 11 a.m., Roman called Sharon. She wanted to know if I wanted a birthday party. His 36 was that month. I said, yes, let's hold one. She said a little kitten had come in from the hills, and she was trying to feed it with an eyedropper. At noon, gardeners Tom and Dave, brothers, arrived. They mowed the lawn and groomed the hedges. Sharon planned to host her shower outside if temperatures cooled. While they worked, Winifred continued cleaning the house. Sharon's new puppy and Gibby and Wojtek's Dalmatian had been scampering about the place, leaving paw prints on the white farmhouse door. Miss Chapman washed the door down with soap and water during the noon hour. At 12:30 p.m., Sharon's friends Joanna Pettit and Barbara Lewis arrived for lunch. Gibby and Wojtek joined them, as did Winifred. It was a long, leisurely meal, with the guests departing at 3:30 p.m. One of the gardeners left at 3:45 p.m. Jay Sebring called shortly thereafter to speak with Sharon. Gibby left to run errands, including her weekly visit with a psychiatrist. Wojtek left at 4 p.m., visited Jay at his studio, and then picked up the keys for the Woodstock house. Witold Kate had stayed there for a few weeks. With Roman's impending return, Wojtek and Abigail planned to return to their rented house in Laurel Canyon by mid-month. The remaining gardener signed for a delivery at 4:30 p.m. It was Sharon's 2 steamer trunks sent from Europe weeks before. Sharon was napping when the delivery came, and the gardener signed for them. The trunks were placed in the living room, adjacent the entryway from the dining room, stacked at an angle. The second gardener left at 4:45 p.m., giving Winifred a ride to her bus station. At 6 p.m., Sharon was awake from her siesta. She spoke again to Jay, who said he would come over. At 6:30 p.m., a bicycle that Abigail purchased was delivered. Jay arrived at approximately the same time as the delivery. Within moments, Gibby and Wojtek returned. Early in the evening, Deborah Tate called and asked to come over, but Sharon declined as she was tired. Sharon, Jay, Wojtek, and Abigail spent the evening at home, followed by a late dinner at El Coyote, the Mexican restaurant on Beverly Boulevard. They arrived back at Cielo Drive shortly before 11 p.m. when Abigail took a phone call from her mother. After the call, she went to her bedroom. There she changed into a long white nightgown and laid down to read. Sharon and Jay retreated to the master bedroom, where Sharon slipped into a bikini bathing suit and a sheer peignoir layered over the swimsuit. It was all she could do to keep cool that sultry evening. Wojtek remained in the living room and began to nap on the sofa. There was one other person living on the property at 10050 Cielo that summer. William Garretson was a 19-year-old Ohioan, living in the guest house. He met property owner Rudy Altobelli the previous spring, and Altobelli invited Garretson to stay in the guest house and work as the caretaker. For his services, Bill was paid $35 weekly, and his responsibilities included caring for Altobelli's 3 dogs, 2 poodles, and a Weimaraner. According to Garretson's polygraph, "Well, I met Mr. Altobelli in Hollywood. He just got back from Europe, and he let some woman stay there before that he knew for 20 years. And, she partied every night and everything, and the place was torn up. He told me if I wanted a job, I could come up and clean his house. And I was going to go back to Ohio in March, and I was picked up for possession of marijuana, and it was lowered to visitation. He said the dogs liked me and everything, and he wanted to know if I would stay on while he went to Europe. Then he would be back, And he asked me, he'd give me an airline ticket home and everything." What Garretson didn't explain was that he met Altobelli while hitchhiking on the Sunset Strip. He also admitted, during a later section of his polygraph exam, that he wasn't gay, but had previously had sex with men, or he thought he might have. Apparently one time he was with a man who wanted to have sex with him, but Garretson fell asleep, so he wasn't sure if the man actually had sex with him or not. And another time, a man performed oral sex on him. We do know that Rudy Altobelli was gay, and it seems that Garretson was at least open to homosexual acts. It may be easy to assume that Altobelli offered Garretson a job, some money, and a free place to stay in exchange for sexual favors. Garretson did mention to police that the dogs liked him, which indicated that he had visited Altobelli at the property before moving there, but otherwise these rumors are wholly unproven and unverifiable. Altobelli was gone most of the months that Garretson stayed there. Bill initially told police that he knew nothing and heard nothing that fateful evening, but in later years admitted that he did hear a few things and had hidden in the cottage in fear for his life. In interviews, Garretson comes across as a very naive, somewhat dense young man. He explained to the polygrapher that the people in the main house liked to party and used drugs, and he didn't care for that. Sure, he'd been arrested once for possession of marijuana, and also used LSD and Benzedrine, and was known to drink 4 beers in one sitting, but he didn't use that stuff. Garretson also let friends stay at the guest house. Sometimes he and Daryl double-dated, and Garretson even let 2 women, one Debbie Tidwell and a Patty Maloney, crash at the guest house. He also let a Marine from Pendleton named Roy stay there. On Friday, Garretson was at home alone. The night before, Daryl and Debbie visited for a couple hours. Sounds as if Garretson made the guest house available to buddies to hook up with their girlfriends. But the next day he was on his own. He wasn't feeling too well, frankly. Bill drank a lot of beer on Thursday, and on Friday he was hungover. He managed to clean the guest house and wash dishes. Then at 8:30 p.m., he hitchhiked down to the Sunset Strip. He purchased a TV dinner from Turner's drugstore, plus a Coke and a pack of cigarettes. He walked around for a while, then started back toward Benedict Canyon. He was picked up hitchhiking by a group of female hippies who dropped him off at the gate to 10050 Cielo Drive around 10 p.m. Garretson popped the TV dinner into the oven and turned on the television. He watched a show and ate potato chips while waiting for his dinner to cook. Around 11:30 p.m., there was a knock at the door. It was Stephen Parent carrying a clock radio. Steve was 18 years old, a recent graduate from Arroyo High School in El Monte. Born February 12, 1951, Steve had 1 sister and 2 brothers, and their dad worked in construction. Parent was well liked in school and had several girlfriends throughout his teen years. He had gingery red hair, wore glasses, and possessed a winning smile. He also played the guitar and had a keen interest in electronics. According to his sister Janet, Steve was fascinated by electronics and mechanics, and he stole several radios, bringing them home and tearing them apart to understand how they worked. Steve actually spent time at a juvenile correction facility for petty crimes during his teens, mainly theft of electronics. But his troublesome days seemed to be behind him, and that fall, he was planning to register for community college. Steve had just got off work from his second job at a stereo shop on Wilshire Boulevard. He first visited a friend, John Lefebvre, who worked in a nearby grocery store. Steve had dated John's younger sister. He tried to get John to go driving with him, but Lefebvre begged off. Steve left without him. He needed extra cash and hoped to sell a Sony AM/FM Digimatic clock radio. Steve brought it with him when he stopped by to see Garretson, hoping the 19-year-old would be interested. Parent did a quick demonstration of the clock and radio's capabilities, including setting the time at 12 midnight while the radio was plugged into the wall socket. Bill declined to buy the radio. They sat, talking and sharing a beer. He asked me if I had been living by myself, and I said yeah, and he asked me who the two girls were inside the main house, and I told him Mrs. Polanski and Abigail Folger. And he went into a big thing, who are they? Then Parent borrowed Bill's phone to call a friend, a UCLA student, still hoping to unload the radio. According to Garretson, after the call, Steve unplugged the radio, said goodbye to Bill, and left the caretaker's cottage. He walked out to his car, his father's 1966 AMC Rambler. Some have insinuated that Steve and Bill must have had a sexual encounter that night, given the late hour of Parent's visit, but this is unlikely. Steve met Garretson only a few days earlier, giving the older boy a ride hitchhiking and dropping him off at Cielo in an obviously wealthy neighborhood. When Steve was looking to sell the radio, he thought of Garretson and stopped by. It seems as innocent as it likely was, and Steve's autopsy report later showed no evidence of sexual activity. As Steve drove down the driveway, Garretson heard the dogs barking. Then he heard several popping noises. It sounded like fireworks. The friend that Steve telephoned while visiting Garretson places the call at approximately 11:45 p.m. The killers would have left Spawn Ranch after 10 p.m. when the call from Sandy and Mary came through. The drive from Spawn Ranch to 10050 Cielo would have been approximately 31 miles if driven directly, perhaps 45 minutes. The killers did not, however, drive directly. Steve set the clock at midnight, although it might have been shortly before or after midnight. He simply knew it had been approximately an hour since he left work, at 11 p.m., and midnight was a safe guess as to time. He was only setting the time to demonstrate it to Garretson. He wasn't relying upon that time as accurate. Parent probably left the caretaker's cottage 15 minutes after he set the clock, positioning the time he unplugged the radio at 12:15 a.m. It is unclear how close to the actual time he set it for, and therefore exactly what time the killers approached the property.